So and I know that this is, and I thank Huddle and Ashley and them for deferring tonight so we could do this. But I want to first hear some words from the president of the Correction Officers Benevolent Association, the largest municipal jail union in the nation, and the second largest law enforcement union in the city, and let him speak. We're going to be followed, he's going to be followed by the Bronx District Attorney, and then I want a couple of the young people, and then I'm going to the audience. If you are sitting next to someone that gets rowdy, tell them that we do not permit that in the House of Justice. You can express yourself without being uncivil. And I'm sure, I've been guaranteed by Mr. Seabrook that certainly correction officers are examples of discipline and preserve. So I'm appealing to others to also do the same. Let us hear Norman C.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. Thank you, D.A. Clark, Judge Clark, for having the insight to come and have a discussion for the first time in the city of New York about real reform.
Stand up.
I said thank you, Judge Clark, and I thank you to Reverend Sharpton. You know, as the president of the Correction Officers Union, it's not an easy job. You have to maintain care, custody, and control, but you have to have respect for those that are incarcerated in the city's jail system at the same time. I live in the Bronx. I've been a member of the Department of Corrections since 1985. I've watched some things happen in the department that I, as a member of the agency, is not proud to have watched. And I have had the opportunity to stop correction officers from going to a certain level in their career. That is why they still have their career. But at the same time, we have inmates that are in the city's jail system that also violate the rules and regulations, policies, and procedures. These are the same individuals that some of us have family members that are incarcerated. These are the same individuals that we used to see on the streets of New York City. But they have committed or allegedly committed crimes that they need to be incarcerated for. I met Ms. Brower, Khalif's mother, briefly at a State of the City address, I believe it was, given by the city council speaker. And I walked up to her, I shook her hand, I kissed her. I said that no mother should bury their child. And I was apologetic for anything that she may assume that we did that we didn't do or we did that we shouldn't have done. And at the end of the day, the point that I'm making is that you meet the same people on the way up as you can meet on the way down. Rikers Island, in my opinion, needs to be overhauled. It needs to be overhauled for the safety and security of everyone, not just correction officers, not just for inmates, not just for civilians, but for everyone, for even the ones that are visiting the jails. Rikers Island has turned into a dumping ground. We have the mentally ill, we have the homeless, we have the innocent, we have the guilty, we have all those that some of you don't want on the streets of New York City, but no one wants to give us the help to deal with the situations that we deal with. Even in the United Nations, world leaders come together to have discussions on what they should do about a particular country that's doing something. I don't understand why the city of New York won't come together and invite discussion on what needs to be done with the Department of Correction. The Department of Correction can be fixed. It can be fixed when all parties sit at the table and have a stake in the game. If you don't have a stake in the game, then you're not part of the game. This is not a beat up Mayor de Blasio. He's in one corner. The governor's in another corner. speakers in another corner. The city, other advocates and public officials are in another corner, and no one's coming to the middle of the ring to say, let's talk. Not let's box, let's talk. Let's do what it is that we're supposed to do to change the environment of the children so that our children don't end up on Rikers Island. We get but our children are here. You all know, every one of you in here know, they can close Rikers Island tomorrow. I don't have a problem with them closing Rikers Island because there's always going to be correction officers, because there's always going to be crime. But where do you put that jail at? You're not putting that jail on 65th Street and Park Avenue. You're not putting that jail down by Gracie Mansion. You're putting that jail in the South Bronx across this bridge right here, or you're putting that jail down the street on 125th Street somewhere, or you're putting it in Bedford-Stuyvesant, or you're putting it in Red Hook. You're not putting it in Dumbo, and you're not putting it someplace else where they're paying millions and millions of dollars for these apartments that we're buying. So why not take the opportunity to take a lesson and say, let's do something about it? I know I'm going to hear the questions, so I'm going to answer the question right now. Yes, there are correction officers that do what they are not supposed to do, and they should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But that doesn't negate the fact that we don't deserve to be assaulted, slashed, slapped, urinated on, feces thrown on, beat up, or have our families
Bronx District Attorney. Yo. Okay. One, two. Let us hear now from the Bronx District Attorney, who is I'm happy had agreed to come tonight. She's the first black female district attorney in the history of New York. And we welcome her views on the Rikers Island closing, and as a prosecutor, certainly the situation with Brown and others that have so disturbed us. She can talk from being a newly appointed. She had nothing to do directly with the Browder case, of the overall problems that we're concerned about. Let us welcome Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. Thank you, Mr. Seabrook. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. And thank you all for coming out and showing an interest in this very, very important issue that we face here in New York City. There's no sugarcoating it. There's a real crisis at Rikers Island. And as the Bronx District Attorney, it is under my jurisdiction to handle the matters or the offenses that occur at Rikers Island. And when I took office in January 1st, and even before that, I let it be known that I was going to take a leadership role in bringing all the stakeholders together to try to get to the bottom of the issues that are facing everyone that goes to Rikers Island, whether it's an inmate, whether it's the officers, whether they're visitors, whether they're staff that work there. It's a very important matter to me. Rikers Island is a Bronx jurisdiction, and right now is the worst neighborhood that I have in the Bronx. And something needs to be done about it. And I take full responsibility for that. Some people say take the jurisdiction away from the Bronx because of the way things have handled. Give me a chance to try to restore Now, I've been to Rikers Island as a prosecutor when I first started as an assistant district attorney. I spent 16 years on the bench here in New York City, so I visited there because that's one of the places where when I sentence people, they would serve their sentence there or await trial there. And then I was there just last week now as the district attorney of the Bronx. And the facility is a mess, really. It's antiquated. It was hot in there. It's very depressing. It's a relic. There's no question about it that something needs to be done just to the physical plant, let alone the things that are happening inside of it. But even if the powers that be were able to close Rikers Island right now, that's going to take years to build a new facility. So we have to deal with the issues at Rikers as it exists right now and work on, not only working on the physical plan, but let's get started on some plans to do some real reform in the way people are treated at Rikers Island. Not only the inmates, but also the staff, everyone. Public safety is my concern for the people of the Bronx. So I gotta make sure that when I'm prosecuting cases that affect not only Bronx residents, but as the person who runs or is in charge of prosecuting the offenses at Rikers Island, that we get the most dangerous people off the street that are threatening our communities. Because if they are doing that and they're committing offenses, then they should be held accountable for that. And if they end up in Rikers Island, so be it, but they still should be protected and safe while they stay there and await trial. And delays in these trials is not fair to the inmates or to the victims. So I'm here to represent both sides because that's my responsibility. All the people that have to go to Rikers Island. Again, Rikers has so many problems because the solution has been just lock them up, set bail, and let them sit there until the trial happens. The low-level offenders, the most violent offenders, mentally ill, everybody is all there, and it's just a pot that's ready to burst open. And that's what's actually happening. There's so much violence, the inmate on inmate slashings, the inmates on staff, the staff on the inmates. It's gotta stop. And the buck starts with me, I believe, because I have to take a leadership role and show everyone that works at Rikers Island, if you commit an offense there, you're gonna have to deal with my office. So that's whether it's an officer that uses excessive force on an inmate, which we prosecute those every day, whether it's and more so whether or not it's the inmates that are committing the offenses on the staff as well as on the other inmates. The message has to be brought across that I'm going after everybody that brings that type of dysfunction to the the message also has to be made to the people in the community that help to feed this violence that actually happens. You have visitors going in there, smuggling contraband to the inmates that allows them to commit violence against each other and the staff. You have officers that are part of it, that are smuggling things in, and they're also adding to the problem as well. Everybody has to be dealt with. Anybody that supplies the stuff to the officer or a visitor, I'm going after them. Anybody that's in the jail that's actually doing it and bringing it in, I'm going to deal with them. So it's inside and outside. I believe that is the way to properly deal with the problem at Rikers Island. But they need the resources. And I've looked at the matter now to see how the investigations are done at Rikers Island. And there are two sides. There's the public integrity side, and then there's also the inmate side. And just looking at the resources, the city has about 80 investigators that investigate corrections officers and staff that work at Rikers Island to investigate if they're doing any wrongdoing. That's fine. But on the other half, when you have inmates in there slashing each other, hurting staff and everything, there's only 30 investigators for that. That's a disparity.
Yes, it is.
That's a disparity right there. So you're not going to have a safe Rikers Island when they're only really concentrating on one side and not the other. Both feed into each other. So therefore, my approach is to make sure that all the investigators...
Right next to you is the biggest crook and criminal in New York City. He's overseeing the biggest gang together with Pat Lynch. You are responsible for police murder being dead. You are responsible for him languishing in a jail cell for 3 years. You are responsible for him being locked in solitary confinement. You are responsible for him killing himself when he got out after being tortured. Who's going to go after you? Who's going to put you on trial? Who's going to investigate you on trial? That's what Rikers Island is a trial chamber. What about the Rikers Island is your untouchable day? The United States of America, you're guilty of torture. We've been alive. Who's going to investigate you?
Let them express themselves. Everyone else be seated. Let them express themselves. Now, let me say this. It would seem to me that if we are going to deal with this, and I predicted there was going to be some passion, I think that we need to hear, and we're going to let everyone that wants to say something, say something. I am a long-term protester, but if you've got a town hall meeting and can speak, you don't need to disrupt everybody else.
No, it's important that my office focus on both sides of the matter, whether it's the staff and corrections officer or whether or not it's the inmates. The key to it is that to make sure the resources is there to investigate the cases, to make sure evidence collected properly, that the right witnesses are identified, that the cameras are used to see who are actually committing these crimes, and make sure that my office is able to bring forth the best prosecution possible. I think that if people think that they can get away with things, they're going to do it. So the message that I want to bring is that you're not going to get away with it, that you're causing the violence, that I'm going to make sure that something is done about it. Thank you.
I want to hear from two of our young people from Youth Huddle, and then I want to start questions. I'm going to take 5 at a time, just 5. So you that want to raise a question or make a point can get online up to 5 people. Let's hear first from James Gray, who's the Youth Adult Huddle.
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Gray, and I'm a proud member of the National Action Network. I'm also a NAN Huddle Adult representative and a founding member of the NAN Young Professionals Group. I'm also an executive board member of an organization called the Why Tommy Initiative, which is an organization that advocates for wrongfully convicted prisoners and prison reform. I visited Rikers Island on many occasions. I spoke with inmates, I spoke with correction officers, and I spoke with staff there. I've done extensive research on a lot of issues that are plaguing Rikers Island. The systematic approach to closing Rikers Island, in my opinion, is a scapegoat for an internally flawed system of prison reform. Not to mention that it would cost millions, but not billions of dollars for taxpayers if Rikers Island was to close right now. Now, with all due respect, we can't overlook the gang violence in Rikers Island. We can't overlook the attack on prison staff. We can't overlook the rise in slashings and stabbings on Rikers Island either. And we can't overlook the infrastructure issue. But we also can't overlook the misplaced population of mental ill inmates on Rikers Island. The City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene is sitting on the sidelines as scores of mentally ill people who belong in hospitals and mental health facilities are shipped to Rikers Island just because it's convenient. City jails are not equipped to deal with the mentally ill, and it's about time we come up with a plan and a treatment and resources to fund this instead of shifting the responsibility. What's missing is a systematic reform for comprehensive medical care, medical health policy changes. Inmates are being denied medication for bipolar, paranoid schizophrenia, and anxiety, which in turn creates an immediate hostile environment that correction officers are not prepared or trained to deal with. Simply stated, prisons are not mental hospitals. And despite the fact, 40% of Rikers Island inmate population right now is classified as mentally ill. This is an embarrassment to New York City, to the prison system. While Mayor Bill de Blasio's office announced a $130 million set of programs to improve mental health care in New York's prisons, it primarily relies on cutting off the flow of mentally ill at the arrest level. The only flaw to that is that it doesn't move the mentally ill from jail into properly funded mental health facilities. Instead, it institutionalized Rikers Island as half mental institution and half jail, where the mentally ill are getting the short end of the stick. A blanket prohibition of housing for mentally ill in jail for prolonged times would be appropriate. A plan that would significantly reduce overcrowding concerns, which in turn contributes to a culture of violence. Instead of shutting down Rikers Island and building a new prison, we need to invest in mental health facilities that could properly house and better accommodate the mentally ill. Thank you.
From the youth huddle, let us hear from a young lady who is part of this every Monday night, Dominique Johnson.
Hello, my name is Dominique Johnson. I am the Teen Huddle representative here at the National Action Network. When I grew up, I want to be a social rights activist like Reverend Sharpton is now, but I would also like to have a job in software technology. I am 14 years old and I'm in the 9th grade. The school that I attend is named Urban Assembly Gateway for Technology. The prison system is exceedingly significant or momentous concern to our society, especially pertaining to Rikers Island, because of the fact that it affects our youth at the end of it all. For example, it affects me because the only close role model that I have and that is in my life that I love so dearly is my brother Gerard Johnson, which is incarcerated up until this day. When he was 16 years old, he was being held in Rikers Island and making approximately 13 cents an hour. He and everyone else would make approximately $1 a day. Would you like it if you went to your job every day, put in your everything, and then get roughly around $1 a day? The youth move and huddle, as some of you may know, have been meetings held on the first and third Saturday of each month. In every meeting that we have held, we have always touched on this topic, and then later within our conversation, we were connected to the Rikers Island.
We address the first two questions, and then we go to the floor. I want to ask you first, D.A. Clark. As I said in the beginning, the horrific national disgrace of what happened to Browder. Has there been any change in the policies in the Bronx DA's office that would prevent unequivocally something like that happening again, where someone is held without being litigated and forced into situations that led to this tragedy that is certainly something that no one can ever justify or talk away. And has anyone been prosecuted around these kinds of issues?
Thank you for the question, Reverend. First of all, I'd like to say that what happened to Khalif Browder is a terrible tragedy, that my heart goes out to that family for what they went through. As far as anything that is changes in the Bronx District Attorney's Office, once I took office, I vowed that I would make sure that nothing like that ever happens again. And the way that I've decided to handle that is that I have more internal controls now of my assistants that handle all matters, especially the jail cases, and I bring them in now once a week, that we have to go through the backlog and the oldest cases with a concentration on the jail cases to make sure that we're ready for trial. And when we are not, to make sure we speak with the defense attorneys, and if we've lost the witnesses or lost evidence or don't have contacts, that we make sure that the judge knows that, and we are not opposed to having people released while they're waiting for their trial, if in fact we are not ready for trial. So I'm making sure that once a week I go through all of our inventory now. Every bureau, I'm going through it, and I'm holding all the assistants accountable directly to me. That was not something that was done before. So this to make sure that no one ever should have to wait in jail 3 years for their trial. And the trial
Has anyone been prosecuted for abuse and or for any of the things that lead to these kinds of conditions?
Well, not in my 7 weeks, there have not. But it is something that we constantly investigate, all types of wrongdoing. And look, I'm going to deal with people regardless of who it helps or hurts. I made a promise to the people of the Bronx that that was what I'm going to do. And I would go wherever the evidence leads me. And if it should take to a prosecution of someone being responsible for that, then it will happen.
First.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Carl Berkeley. How you doing, Rev? Good evening. My name is Carl Berkeley. How you doing, Rev? And I'm a retired New York City detective, and Rev knows that we were out there with the Eric Garner, and I called for all of the police officers in that case to be arrested. And because I did that, the police put a rap on my car. But also I'm here because the group of individuals that stood up in the back, because I give it to you the way it is, and I'm here for justice. And when I speak against the police department, they come after me. And what I have to say right now, that group is going to be a little bit upset with me, but I hope they don't put a rat on my car. And what I'm here to say is that on behalf of DA Clark, because I was very critical of her getting that position, we also have to understand that Khalif Browder happened under DA Johnson's watch. Since she took office 6 weeks ago or 7 weeks ago, I want to commend her because there's a gentleman by the name of Javier Anger, who her office just released, who has been on Rikers Island for 2 years, and the evidence does not support him being there. And what she did was, and I commend her, she just released that man so that we don't have another Khalif Browder. And what we have to do is, there's a law called 240, which gives the district attorney throughout New York State the right to withhold evidence against people while they're sitting in jail. And my organization, Discovery for Justice, is trying to change that law and bring out 245, which says that when a person is arrested, that the district attorney give over all the evidence to the defense, with the exception of witness information, because if we give over witness information, we know that our witnesses will be harmed and even be killed. But we need to change this law that's called 240, which gives the district attorney and them the right to withhold all evidence while a person languishes in jail, and then they have the audacity to ask them to plea bargain. And we see every day people coming home from doing 15, 20, 30 years, only to find out that they never did the crime, and the district attorney had the evidence, but refused to turn it over. And that's what we have to change. So I want to commend you, DA Clark, because you did say to me, give me a chance, and you released Javier, and I appreciate that. And I'm also here on your behalf too, Norman, because as a retired law enforcement, we just want justice on both sides. And my wife retired from doing 20 years, and I want to commend everybody for protecting her, because it's not an easy job. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Rev. Sharpton. I am here today with breaking news. This is a case covering 15 years. Civil case was filed in 2001 and never had a trial. Police beat me up in the Bronx. He broke my hands. Look my hands. He damaged my eyes. And I not come here to talk. I have all the evidence to prove with the FBI office. Over 100 calls made there on United Nations. And the captain for that United Nations, Errol Edwards, my cousin. I bring this paper for you, Judge Clark. Could you hand this to her? And you go over that and see. All my lawyers that I had, including the Johnny Capron firm, none of them came forward and do anything about this case. Reverend Al Sharpton is the one who called Internal Affairs in 2001. Sergeant Taylor, Sergeant Albani said the officers guilty of what they did. I have a clean record. They said they're going to speak to the district office to claim my name. When I went back in court on October 24, 2001, I went to court 5 years every month, never skip a month, for 7 charges the officer gave me. And I did not make you fingerprint me at the precinct. And this is the evidence to prove. Look, all the court slips, return slips. What we're gonna say, something like this wrong I've done without justice, I'm not gonna make the walk, including judges, Judge Clark, Judge Darcel, Judge Oliver, Judge Sandberg, Judge Torres, Judge Barrett, every one of them involved in this cover-up. You have the name there, that's the printout of the court. Justice have to serve. And I would like to have your telephone number so you can call the judge. Because every time, no, this is serious. Every time I call the district attorney office, the secretary said you can't speak to Mr. Johnson, the police have charge against me. When the charge is clear, I call again, over 10 times they say I can't speak to Mr. Johnson. I have charge against their officers. So when you want to speak to Mr. Johnson, now he's out of office, who's going to do something now? I'm looking forward for you to do something now.
All right.
Good evening. Excuse my voice. Madam District Attorney, thank you for taking this time to come and talk with us. To my good friend, Norman, he and I started the job way back in 1985 in Reverend Sharpton. Thank you for taking this time. As one of Reverend Washington's armor bearers, I understand the anointing that you bring here. And to all my friends in correction. So if we talk about reform on Rikers, we have to understand what the problem is. So to understand where we're at today, we have to understand where we were. And there was a time, not long ago, where the inmate census far exceeded what it is today. And the jails were under control. Officers, captains, assistant deputy wardens, and wardens had control of the facility until that one fateful night, I think it was in 1989, during the riot that I was involved in. And then we had a commissioner that came on board. And I don't want to rub anybody the wrong way, but we cannot rewrite history. When Bernard Carrick came to the New York City Department of Correction, jail violence went down. During the time where the inmate census far exceeded what it is today. never mind what happened to Mr. Carey personally. Facts are facts. So then you have to ask, what happened during that time that was so innovative, where slashings went down? You had the institution of what's called a rearrest unit, where inmates knew that if they assaulted a New York City correction officer, you're gonna face charges. And Madam District Attorney, it's out of your control that assaulting a correction officer is an E felony. That's not your call. But maybe you can work on that and make it your call. Because if you assault a police officer, or if you're a correction officer in any other jurisdiction, I have children who are law enforcement professionals. My father was a police officer in this town where black people were called something else. It's in my blood, even though all of our blood is indigo blue anyway, but it's always be blue.
All right, let me, thank you.
But just to recap, Reverend Sharpton, I know I got to say, but excuse me, one quick point, Reverend Sharpton. When we talk about reform, it has to start from the top. That's right. We follow orders. We don't mandate them.
But let me ask you, Mr. Seabrook, has any correction officer been prosecuted for the assaults and the violence against inmates?
Thank you again. Yes, the answer is yes. Correction officers are arrested under the Bronx District Attorney's Office, Rob Johnson, and prosecuted. I have correction officers from the Emergency Services Unit right now that were suspended for over 2 years for a crime that they allege to have committed against an inmate. I saw the inmate standing outside of the courtroom on television, and he looked fine. He looked great. And here's what my problem is you suspend my correction officer for defending him or herself or defending the life of another inmate. And the correction officer says that the inmate had a weapon in his hand, and you put him in the street for 2 years. And you know, God is good to me, and I know people are going to say whatever they want. But I watched a guy get choked on television.
Amen.
I watched a man get choked on television.
Amen.
And that guy, that police officer, didn't go in the street for 2 years.
That's right.
So you send my guy to the street for 2 years on a suspension, and you tell me that we're bad, we're no good. But I watch all of these other things take place in the city of New York, and we're not treated equally, and we're not treated the same. And correction officers need to receive the same respect as everybody else. If you did something wrong, if a correction officer does something wrong, and I tell them at the academy on day one, if you do something that you're not supposed to do, you're going to get indicted. Your job is not to punish inmates. Your job is not to stomp inmates. Your job is not to group up with 4 or 5 of you and go down there and beat some inmate until they're unconscious. Your job is to maintain care, custody, and control. And I do tell them to use whatever force is necessary to terminate that threat. But once that threat is over, it's over. I don't want you beating on this guy when he's handcuffed. I don't want you breaking this guy's jaw because you feel as though you did something special. Because at the end of the day, these are human beings. These are our children. And I think when I listen to the people talk about Khalif Browder, I didn't put Khalif Browder in jail. While he was in there, and I know some of y'all watched that video up there, and whether you realize it or not, those same inmates that you've seen on that video, they were attacking Browder. And the correction officer was the one who stood there, and they're fighting these guys back to stop to protect that kid's life. The system is flawed at the top, not on the level of a correction officer. The system is flawed by the criminal justice system that allows people to be put in jail for crimes that they did not commit. There is no way a child is supposed to be placed in jail for a damn backpack. That's not what he's supposed to be. They want to blame correction officers for it. At the end of the day, I'm satisfied with the fact that I can close my eyes at night and know I give my brothers and sisters instructions on being a professional law enforcement officer. But I appreciate you, Rev, and I appreciate you, Judge Clark, because nobody else in the city wants to have this conversation. They just want to pass the buck. Nobody wants to talk about the real problems that Rikers Island. Why don't you give us the leadership that we need and put the money into the infrastructure to rebuild it and start teaching these kids a trade as opposed to locking them in the cell? Why don't you start turning around and teaching them how to be a plumber? Why don't you turn around and teach them how to be a locksmith? Why don't you turn around and give them a driver's license? But they don't want to do that.
My question, and I'm going to the floor, is with all that being said, and you know we fight the gun case here that you referred to, a officer that is given a badge and gun as a correction officer does not have the same responsibility that an inmate has. An inmate, many of them may have committed a crime, many of them may not have. A correction officer should not be committing crimes.
Absolutely not.
And my question is, are they being prosecuted?
Yes,
Are they being penalized? And is the union defending criminals that are CO?
Let me answer that wholeheartedly. We have, as the union, I have a responsibility to represent the men and women of this organization because you are innocent of just like today's power, just like all of the other individuals that be arrested and incarcerated, just like some of you right here who have children that are incarcerated, you will support your child and do what it is that you're supposed to do. Now, I'm not saying I'm the father of these brother and sister officers, but I am responsible to ensure that their rights are protected just like every single right of every
Good evening, everyone. My name is Herman Francis. I sat on Community Board 1 in the Bronx for 12 years, also member of the school board 5 years for Bloomberg and Bulldogs. But I'm a firm believer in solutions, and solutions is very simple. The Harrison Act of 1914. Because politicians created this mess, and get the politicians uncreated. We talk about one issue here, LAW. Harrison Act, once again, of 1914, laid the groundwork for this large the Daily Challenge last week, or why is drug addiction treated differently in the suburbs, number one. Also, the Stamp Act Act of 1937, because this may be upfront about this. Jail is big business. It's about the working context. If it costs $100 a day to keep a person in the bed, that's $36,500 a year. $16.50 an hour to work 40 hours a week. It costs the city of New York, for someone 16 years age or younger, $160,000 a year to keep that person in that jailhouse in the Bronx, which I demonstrate against building. I'm saying this effect right here, that the solution is very simple. What's that? What law are you talking about? I'm retired from retail. Are we talking about landlords overcharging people, predatory lenders? Are we talking about the markets out here who sell outdated food overcharging? Are we talking about people who fail to deliver goods? What kind of crime are we talking about here? We're talking about putting people in jail for what? Jail started as a European invention, number one. There's no African word for it, let's be upfront. If we are talking about accountability of behavior, then just take a good look at how the United States is set up in municipalities. You only got about 40 million people in the United States out of 330 that live in the city with 50,000 population or more. Majority of the United States people, 76% of the population, live in a town or village with a population is 5,000 or less, where the housing stock is predominantly ownership. The biggest crime in these towns is burglary. You got to look this stuff up and read it. Now what happened to them people? they get put in a treatment program. The only people going to jail are those who live in cities. And the only way you're going to do, the politicians got to change the law. Yes, black lives be tore down, make a treatment center. On that schoolboy issue, they got the lottery out here. You got to really look at this. The lottery money, they're supposed to go to education. But yet, it's about...
Correction Captain, there is a pattern of ignorance when the administration is not here to be on the panel to speak on it yet. There is a pattern of ignorance when you have Commissioner Joe Pond, when he makes his tour to C-74 and tell the people that he doesn't want to see any officers or inmates in the hallway. That's a pattern of ignorance. There is a pattern of ignorance when you get rid of your experienced supervisors and replace them with those who drive cars and do all the other stuff. That's a pattern of ignorance. However, my question to the panel, it says real reform. So that means reform also consists of when these individuals get out and go back into society. And so my question is, what are we going to put in place for those individuals when they return back to society? And then the last thing I want to say to the audience, raise your children, because if you don't, the streets will.
What happens before they get there and what happens after they get out. We need to do more to make sure that there's something for our young people to do before they end up in practice. If they have a drug problem, make sure they get the treatment. If they have mental health problems, make sure we get them jobs, education, school. That's a big part of it. But once they enter the system, even while they're in there needs to be programs to make sure that they spend their time wisely while they're in there, while they're awaiting their trial. Because remember, Rikers Island is only for those sentenced for 1 year or less, and the others, the most part, are people awaiting trial. So they're in there because they can't make the bail. That's another reform that we have to talk about, fixing the bail system to make sure that non-violent, low-level offenders don't necessarily have to await their trial in Rikers Island. Rikers Island should be left for the most serious offenders to make sure that they're in there so that the communities can remain safe. So do something to make sure that the inmates have something to do while they're there, learn a trade, and some of the things that you talk about. And the third part of reform is the re-entry part. And in the Bronx, there's been a gaping hole with this, where people are going into jail and prisons and serving their time, and when they come out, there's not proper re-entry. Assistant district attorneys that are assigned to work right on the island. I've already gone out there. The Department of Corrections and the city has already provided the space for us. We're setting up the office now, and it'll be up and running when they finish building the trailer. It'll be 6 to 8 weeks, but I'm gonna physically be there. So when these things are happening, we are gonna be right there on the spot to immediately begin the investigation. And once the inmates see this, once those officers, and there have been officers, you talk about whether or not they've been prosecuted. We had at least last month, at least 2 officers that were smuggling contraband into Rikers Island, okay? And I say to all those officers, your fellow brothers and sisters are not doing you any favors. That's right. Like equipping these inmates with this contraband because the criminal activity continues and you're now a part of it. So guess what? I'm not only going after them, but I'm going to go after you too because you're helping to protect them.
Any correction officer that promotes prison contraband should be arrested and not wear our uniform, because we are proud to some of the correction officers that we have now, and I still live in the Bronx, I tell correction officers at the academy, don't take on the identity of those you are paid to supervise. Because at the end of the day, I understand you live down the street from Pookie. I get that. But Pookie got to understand who you are now. And you have to be able to make that separation between being hanging out with the boys or you hanging out with the men. At the end of the day, there are some correction officers that are intimidated by the gang violence, by all of the codes of gang and codes of the street. And I fault, exactly, and there are some who are part of organized gangs that there shouldn't be.
But then that's the question I want you to address. The correction officers that themselves become part of the gang or use the gangs against each other, how can an inmate that is under that kind of siege report that without putting themselves in harm? Let me say this. One of the things that we're going to do, I said we're going to do a series of these, is I'm going to do a town hall with inmates.
Absolutely.
On Rikers Island. Because a lot of them have nowhere to go because they don't know who they're talking to. And if they can't talk to law enforcement in the jail without finding out that they're talking to people who are part of the problem, then where do they go then?
I say this, right, and I don't mean no disrespect to those that are...
You can disrespect us what we do here. We are Bronx nights.
But I say this, if they had proper managers in the Department of Correction, they would have a better system. And I don't want to, and I'm going to. When you start to allow individuals like Chief William Clements, who I see sitting in front of you, stand up there, stand up. When you start to push former chiefs that know this job out the door and put those in charge that don't know shit about this job, then you know how to problem. When you start to allow individuals to take a seat at the table and you won't sit down, and that's why this town hall is so important, because we're taking down the information, but I want suggestions, because if Joe Plum can come up with 14 points to change things around, we can certainly come up with 4 points to make this a better organization in the city of New York.
But this has been going on a long time. Right. And this has, with all due respect, as you say, when we had people that knew better, we still had the problem. So how do we deal with the problem? Inmates have rights as well as correction officers. Everyone's rights must be protected, or no one has rights.
Well, then at the same time, it's very easy to take. It's very easy to take a brush and say it's the fault of 9,000 correction officers because one person did something wrong. That's easy to do. But then if that be the case, in which I have never said and I don't say, then it's every inmate in the city's jail system is guilty. It's easy for me to say that as well, but they're not. At the end of the day, each individual is responsible for their responsibilities as a man or woman. And that's important, but I think that what we should be doing is we should be sitting down saying, okay, we know we have a problem. Let's rebuild facility by facility one at a time. These 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds, and I have a picture right here on my phone of an inmate that was slashed Saturday night by another inmate, and he got over 250 stitches. Look, right? 250 stitches in his face. What do I do with this inmate that slashed this woman's child and gave him 250 stitches in his face? Then they say you can't put him in punitive segregation. So if I can't put him in punitive segregation and I can't put him in administrative segregation, what do they want me to do? Take him home with me? I don't know what else to do. Now, I'm not saying all inmates are bad, because they're not. 95% of the inmates in the city's jail system, 95% of them go in, do their time, and go home. It's only 5% of them. 5% of them that are intimidated by the other inmates, intimidated by the gang violence. They took a guy, you take a guy like Khalif Browder, who got caught allegedly stealing a knapsack, and you put him in the same housing area with guys that are charged with murder, he's guaranteed to come out a murderer or right worse than what he went in. Guaranteed, and that's what's wrong with our system. We don't separate them the way that they're supposed to be. We don't re-educate them. You got an inmate sitting in a jail cell right now, doing absolutely nothing but looking at the paint on the wall. You can't tell me you can't teach this kid how to be a plumber. You can't tell me you can't teach this kid how to be a plastic. You can't teach this kid nothing but recycle these kids. Recycle these kids. And another thing I want to say, and I have to say this, every single time you turn on the news, you see the yellow crime scene tape of who got killed. These kids starting to think that this is the badge of honor. How dare you take a 7-year-old to school and walk past a crime scene tape and the mother says, oh, don't worry about it, somebody got killed last night. They don't even have somebody in the education system to talk to these kids and tell them it's not supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be like that.
All right, let's go back. When he was beaten, was that reported to anyone, or there's no confidence?
They cover it up. They cover it up.
We have over 2,000 cameras. 2,000 cameras.
How do you deal with cover-up as he's charged? He's talking about a specific case. DA, again, I know you've only been there 7 weeks, and I can say this, we've not concluded where we are on Rikers, but your predecessor was not popular here after the Amity Diallo case. I'll be honest, and then Browder on top of that, but how do you deal with cover-up? How do you dig in and enforce the law to protect the inmates?
Well, Norman is right about the cameras, and by the end of this year, they're going to have even more cameras there. That's part of the evidence that I use to prosecute the officers and inmates alike, is that you have to view the video. But see, that's why I'm going to set up an office there with not only assistant district attorneys, but also investigators as well. As soon as those incidents happen, we're already going to be there. And once we get there, we make sure that the violators are separated. You get to talk to the witnesses. We're going to view the video right away. People make phone calls from Rikers that they are warned that if you say something over the phone that is being recorded. Those are the things that we use as evidence. And there's been plenty of cover-ups. There's 9 corrections officers on trial right now in the Bronx over the very thing, failing to report things or, changing stories, different things like that. But I think it'll change once my office is physically there, because people are going to know. I mean business. That's why I'm there. I can ignore it from the Bronx, but I'm going to be there, and that is how you deal with the cover-ups.
They don't need
May I?
in my facility.
Reverend, brother, let me say this to you, and I say this, and all correction officers and all civilians and anybody who's ever read anything that I've said without taking it out of context or changing my words or editing their own film. I do not believe it's fair, right, or just to beat on anyone. I've said it before, I will say it again. If you are being assaulted, use whatever force is necessary to stop the assault. If you are protecting another inmate, use whatever force is necessary to protect the inmate or civilian. You see, we had at one point punitive segregation, where the mayor came in, he ended punitive segregation, the Board of Corrections came in, voted on it. Young adults, adolescents can't go to punitive segregation, so there's no deterrent for them. You can beat on as many people as you want to beat on, and you go right back to general population to your housing area. I'm proposing consecutive sentences. That if an inmate assaults a correction officer, an inmate, or a civilian, that he or she receive a mandatory 5 years automatically. That's a deterrent. If you don't want me to put them in punitive segregation, then what do I do with them? I love the President of the United States. Correction officers was the only union outside of Illinois to support then Senator Barack Obama for President of the United States. I love the President.
But he's against punitive.
He is, and that's where I'm going right now.
And so most of us.
And I get it, and like I said in my op-ed piece in USA Today, What do I do with an inmate that continuously breaks the jaw of a correction officer, slashes another inmate, rapes another inmate? Where do I put this inmate? And I've said, and I will say it again, I love my president. But if my president stopped right here at National Action Network, he couldn't tell you how to get to Rikers Island. So until you come to Rikers Island to know what it is that we have to deal with, then people need to understand what we deal with. I'm not suggesting, hold on, I'm not suggesting that an inmate that gets caught smoking a cigarette go to punitive segregation. I'm not suggesting that an inmate that trashes his cell, floods his cell, curses at an officer, screams and yells. I don't want that kid in punitive segregation. But the kid that slashes the face of a correction officer needs to be rearrested, charged, and placed in punitive segregation. An inmate that assaults another inmate needs to be put in punitive segregation. If he deserves to be in a hospital, then put him in the hospital. But we are not clinicians. I don't know one correction officer here in this room or in the Department of Correction that can determine whether a person has a mental illness. They need to give us the tools that we need so that we are able to combat the problems that the city continues to dump on us as a dumping ground in the Department of Correction.
All right. Please be concise, because I told you we had committed a certain time for
question. My name is Bishop Nathaniel White, retired New York City correction officer. I speak on behalf of my brothers and sisters. The question to the DA. Correction officers only get the eye in the media when we're always doing something wrong or negative. My fellow sisters, before they were officers, they are a woman. The women in uniform should not be tolerating being groped by inmates. The next one. Will you urge and ask and tell the mayor, if the mayor was able to give the EMTs weeks ago peace officer status due to the endangerments that they have in public housing, why are the New York City correction officers still on hold to get police officer status? Now the law. If an inmate assaults an officer that has police officer status, the charges are greater in the court of law. I don't understand if a police dog or a police horse gets hit, you are charged in the court of law as assault on an officer by striking a canine or a horse. Give the correction officers of this city police officer status. Thank you.
To this forum, this reform.
Where?
I'm sorry. I bring you greetings from right across the George Washington Bridge in New Jersey. I am the president of the largest corrections union in the state of New Jersey. And I say this to say that I stand with my brothers and sisters in corrections, because none of us grew up saying that we wanted to be correction officers when we got older. No one knows the job that a correction officer does. No one knows what a correction officer, how we feel when we go inside these facilities. Reform is needed inside these prisons, inside these jails. Reform is needed. Officers are being attacked for no reason. So when we start talking about putting new programs inside these facilities for these inmates to have a trade, make sure that they learn a trade that they can use on the outside so they don't come back inside. Correction officers are not whipping boys and whipping women. They deserve to have their lives protected, and they deserve the same rights and benefits as these inmates.
This past summer, finally, with the injustice that caused Khalid Browder to commit suicide, I started a petition to take Richard Rikers' name off of Rikers Island, because he made money off of selling black children into slavery. And we may not be able to close Rikers Island right away, but we should be able do a piece of legislation in the city council and get Rikers' name off of Rikers Island. For what? He stood for perversion of our system of justice. He was the chief magistrate in New York City. From 1815 to 1838, he got kickbacks from the bounty hunting rings.
I'm a proud lifetime member of the National Action Network, more than 18 years. My question is for Judge Clark. Your honeymoon is probably going to be over in less than a year. I was very excited when you got the election to the Bronx DA because of your reputation as a judge. You're one of the most respected judges in the city of New York. We're fortunate to have you as the Bronx DA. My question for you as someone whose family has been residents at Rikers Island, my mother, my father, my brother, someone myself was born addicted to heroin, lived in group homes in foster care in the Bronx. And I've never had the opportunity to be a guest, and I expect to continue that tradition. My son is finishing up right now. I'll say that my son is got all fours in math and English and science on his state exam, so we don't anticipate him being there either. And as a candidate for city council, and as someone
sure that a young person doesn't spend 3 years in jail awaiting trial. I'm going to make sure that we have, speedy trial really means that, speedy trial. And I'm constantly working with the assistants in my office to make sure that those cases are brought to trial swiftly as possible. Also dealing, also making sure that proper investigations are happening on the cases. I've set up a conviction review unit in my office to make sure that that I review any convictions that have already happened to make sure that those convictions were not wrongful. But at the same time, I'm instituting best practices to make sure that before we get to a point where there's a wrongful conviction, that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that those red flags that you see after the conviction has happened and you review it like, wow, we should have recognized this or this or this, that I'm doing those things beforehand, before I bring the prosecution, during the dependency of the trial, and then before the trial happens, and also during the trial, to make sure that we don't have those things. So I'm making sure that those safeguards are put in place so that we never, ever, ever have situations where we have people there. Now, I inherited a lot of things, okay? So it's not all mine, but it doesn't mean that I'm not responsible for it now. And the case that the gentleman talked about earlier, that's a 4-year-old case. And that gentleman stayed at least 2 years in Rikers Island and continued to say that he was innocent. And, my predecessor did whatever with it. But once it came to my attention, I cannot ignore people saying that they're innocent. I'm going to check it out. And as a 21st century prosecutor, I'm not afraid to review the work that I do. So I'm going to make sure that when I do something, that is done right. And if a mistake is made, I'm going to correct it, which is what I did last week when I dismissed the indictment against Javier Anger because he was not the person. And not only that, not only did I dismiss his case, but now that family of the person that was killed still hasn't had their justice. So now I'm continuing to make sure that the right person.
All right, I said 3, but I'm going to take 2 more.
Good evening. My name is Officer Lee. I've been a correction officer for 25 years, and some people may not like what I'm going to say, but I really don't care. I am a parent, and this department has really is the worst I've seen in my career. And it saddens me because we're here today talking about the inmates and these poor inmates. And I'm not saying that every inmate there is a good guy or a bad guy. I have not heard one victim advocate, for a person advocating for the victims of these people who have committed these crimes against these people. I have not heard anything on TV. I have not heard any one person come up and say, my family has been victimized by Joe. My family has been victimized. Where are the advocates for the victims? Do we have any in the forum?
Well, they're here every week. We at the because I outlined in the beginning, said that we wanted to hear y'all's side. The correction, we also going to the inmates. We also have dealt with the Browder case. I mean, so they're here every rally. You should come to rallies. Okay. I wanted to hear your side. But the victims, clearly, as Sister Shakur said, we deal with all the time of violence, whether it is civilian or police. What we don't understand is how that enables in any way people to feel that those people that have done this, even that are guilty, do not have to have their rights respected.
Absolutely not. And as a correctional officer, we go there every day. We have families that we have to come home to who our rights are not to be violated. We are there to do a job. Just like in every job, there's always a bad apple. In politics, in the hospitals, in the police, and the police force, there's always a bad apple. So I don't want to sit here and say, oh, every correctional officer is wonderful, because they're not.
So do you feel that these are just isolated, that all of this that we're seeing that's systemic, you don't feel it's systemic, you feel it's isolated bad apple?
Absolutely. I'm a correctional officer, I've been there